And they said, but why don't you do something different? Why don't you do like a Bollywood version, in
Yep.
Hindi? And I was like, that's interesting. And they said, George would love that. George would have absolutely loved that. And so really we did the version that we have of Last Christmas, really with George's blessing. And Priyanka Chopra is an old friend of mine. And I called her and said, please come. And she immediately, wanted to support me and said, why not? Although my singing career is over, I love to support you, Gurinder. Well, I have to say, I'd be lying if I didn't say it's got much harder to make movies. I really believe that. I think it's got much harder for us to tell our stories, much harder for people to trust us to tell our stories. Finance isn't really there as much as it should be. And, I feel kind of bad, for people trying to tell our stories.
Christmas Karma is magical, musical, and moving. As a Bollywood-inspired adaptation of Charles Dickens' novel, A Christmas Carol, what did you want the core of the movie to be when you conceptualize this idea?
Well, I love a movie called It's a Wonderful Life by Frank Capra. And that movie sort of is so inspiring about the human condition. And I wanted to make a movie that made me feel like that at Christmas. And It's a Wonderful Life was inspired by Charles Dickens. And so when I started thinking about what could I do, I actually went back and looked at A Christmas Carol, and what Charles Dickens was writing about in 1843 is still very relevant today. He was writing about Victorian England. He was writing about the disparity between rich and poor, the sick, the needy. And really, it was a big plea for tolerance and understanding and compassion. And I felt that those were very important things to make a film about today and in the world that we live in today. And I kind of wanted to make the film for my kids, really, and make them understand really what matters in life, which is the same thing Charles Dickens was saying, and I'm saying exactly the same. It's really, life is about compassion and about giving, and forgiveness and redemption. If you've gone on the wrong path, you can find your way through. And finally, the film is very much from the perspective of Guru Nanak Dev Ji. And even Charles Dickens didn't realize it at the time, but Guru Nanak espouses the idea of ek onkar. We are all connected. Doesn't matter who we are, what background, how wealthy, how rich, how poor. We are all connected, and ek onkar is really his philosophy. And that's what I've put in the film, and that's kind of what Charles Dickens was also saying.
The film is also based on a British Indian exiled from Uganda. So as a Kenyan-born British Indian director, how autobiographical is the film?
Well, it's not particularly autobiographical to me because I was a baby when I came to England. So I've grown up in England. And in many ways, the film is a sort of tribute to my English upbringing as well as my Indian upbringing. I used to love going to church and to sing carols. I still go to church and sing carols. My mum used to send us to Sunday school at the time. And Christmas holds a very special place for us in England. For us with family, with friends, we do all the traditions. And I feel that for me, somebody came into our lives who had this same story. He'd come from Uganda as a young man. His father had died in a refugee camp, and this all happened over Christmas. So it was always very critical about Christmas. Yeah. And when he came to us when I was much younger, he would sort of look at us and say, why are you celebrating Christmas? Why are you trying to be white? And we'd say, no, it's just Christmas. This is what we do, I think that I just was inspired by the fact that he was so damaged by events that had affected him that he couldn't really see the true meaning of Christmas. And I think that's true of a lot of people who leave their homes, go to another place, struggle, to find their way, and then sometimes sort of lapse into depression or lapse into a situation where life maybe hasn't turned out as it should have done for them. And so they kind of look inwards, and can't find the joy in life. So I just felt that sort of really worked for us as well as a community.
And I've also noticed that your films often using music as a strong tool to weave your story. And Christmas Karma has renowned musicians like Nitin Sani, Malkit Singh, Anushka Shankar, Boy George. So what magical wish did you make last Christmas to get them all work on your film?
I think the musical gods were looking down on me. I love music from a very young age. My home was always full of music. My dad used to sing all the time. And so I've grown up with music. And for me, it's a very fantastic way of telling our stories because you can be multi-layered with music. So your pictures can be saying one thing and your music can be saying something else. But at the same time, it all points to how multi-layered our identities are in the modern world, and I was very lucky. I had a meeting with Gary Barlow about something else, and he said, "What are you doing?" And I told him about this project. He said, "Oh, can I be involved? Can I write a song or two?" And he got involved. And Shaznay Lewis from All Saints is a friend of mine. She was actually in Bend It Like Beckham. And she wrote some fantastic songs along with Ben Cullum, her songwriting partner. A lot of very catchy songs. Boy George came in to sing one of the songs that Gary had written, which was amazing. And of course, I really wanted to have a Christmas Bhangra song. And I wanted to bring back Malkit Singh and Jessie Sidhu, two of my artists from Bend It Like Beckham. So
all the Punjabi Bhangra.
Yeah. And then with Last Christmas, I'd actually had a meeting with the George Malkit estate. I'd had lunch with them and they said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm doing a Christmas film." And they said, "Well, why aren't you using Last Christmas?" And I said, "Well, it's really expensive, And they said, "Well, if you're nice to us, we might give it to you." And they said, "But why don't you do something different? Why don't you do like a Bollywood version, in Hindi?" Yep. And I was like, "That's interesting." And they said, "George would love that. George would absolutely love that." And so really we did the version that we have of Last Christmas, really with George's blessing. And Priyanka Chopra is an old friend of mine. And I called her and said, "Please come." And she immediately, wanted to support me and said, "Why not? Although my singing career is over, I'd love to support you, Gurinder."
Oh, that's lovely.
Anushka Shankar did the same thing. Yeah. And I did the same thing with Anushka Shankar. She said, "I'd love to come and support another Indian woman." And that's kind of how we ended up with such a lovely end song to the movie.
Yeah, no, it was amazing. It was the icing on the cake when we had the Desi girl, Priyanka Chopra, singing the Desi version of Last Christmas. So it was beautiful. Gurinder, you are a trailblazer when it comes to representation in diverse storytelling. So how has the landscape of South Asian representation changed since Bend It Like Beckham?
Well, I have to say, I'd be lying if I didn't say it's got much harder to make movies. I really believe that. I think it's got much harder for us to tell our stories, much harder for people to trust us to tell our stories. Finance isn't really there as much as it should be. And, I feel kind of bad, for people trying to tell our stories. And I think ultimately, we as a community are going to have to find a way to rally around. And if we want to see our stories up on the screen, I think we're going to have to make them happen. And the same is true of Christmas Karma. It was actually a lot of Indian people that backed me to make this film. And, I wish that wasn't the case, but I think it's hard to tell our stories. I mean, movie making is hard anyway, but certainly to tell our stories is hard right now.
And also, like when you see it, the Indian British population has also evolved and grown much more compared to Australia. So How have those changes that you've noticed influenced your filmmaking?
Well, I still tell stories from my perspective. Like I haven't changed. I still see the world. I evolve with the world, and I tell stories in the way that I see them. And I think Christmas Karma is as much about English culture as it is my own culture, my Indian culture. It's that blend of who I am and who my kids are. The only thing is, I think for my generation, it's different now. For my kids' generation, they see they see society differently. They don't see race and color in the same way that we used to. You know, when I was much younger, they have a much more of a colorblind approach. You know, which is wonderful. And so they look at things a bit differently. But needless to say, you know, there are still things that have to be challenged. And, you know, I still feel that I have to make films that are about empowerment, empowering our kids, empowering all kids, really, towards, you know, a better, more tolerant society.
And in your films, you've also always displayed the intricacies of Indian heritage and British heritage, be it Viceroy's Horse, Bender Like Beckham, Baji on the Beach. How do you manage to balance the sentiments of both countries while making your films?
Well, like I said, I just do what I think is intuitively correct. And being a combination of these different cultural forces, I just have to be truthful about how I see the world. And that's kind of what I do. And so I end up appealing to people who have a similar background to me, who are not necessarily just Indian, but, you know, all different backgrounds.
Absolutely.
And then I think I also rattle some cages of other people who don't like what I do.
We love whatever you do. And the most exciting part, Bender Like Beckham 2 is finally happening. So what will part 2 look like, and when is it scheduled for a release?
So what I'm doing, I'm in very early stages of exploring what that story could look like and how I would do it. So those are very big boots to fill. You know, the first one is so loved that I need to make sure that what I do, you know, appeals and appeals to that audience. So I'm working hard on some storylines, and I'm exploring the characters. So I'm going to take my time, but it will happen, but I am taking my time.
Last but not the least, Gurinder, what's your Christmas wish?
As the year comes to a close, we have peace in all the troubled spots around the world, and that people see compassion, people see human beings as human beings, and that there is an overwhelming sense of tolerance among humanity, not necessarily political leaders, but ordinary humans that show and fight for compassion and tolerance. That would be an awesome end to this quite hard year.
Thank you, and we hope to see you in Sydney soon. The last time we met you was for the Viceroy's House screening.
Yes, I'm due a visit. My Chacha ji is there.
Yes, I know. He was the one who organized it.
Yes, so he is very keen that I should visit. So I must make a trip soon.
Please do. We would love to see you.
Thank you.